The apartment always smelled faintly of eucalyptus cleaner and warm wood, the kind of place that looked calm even when the air inside it wasn't. Morning light slid across the living room floor in clean rectangles, catching on the edges of furniture I had chosen, paid for, and maintained without ever announcing it. I stood at the kitchen counter that day, listening to the low hum of the dishwasher, when my mother-in-law's voice carried in from the hallway like it already owned the space. He didn't know. That fact had shaped everything for years. My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 35 years old. She stood near the doorway with her arms crossed, chin lifted, surveying the apartment with the confidence of someone who believed she understood exactly how things worked. My husband sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, not fully present, already trained to let conversations like this pass over him without resistance. I had learned to read the signs early. This wasn't a discussion. It was a decision she expected to be accepted. She said her oldest son and his wife needed stability. She said family had to prioritize those who were building real futures. He said this apartment was perfect for them. Then she looked directly at me and said casually, like she was suggesting a furniture rearrangement, that I should move out. There was no cruelty in her tone. That was the part that stung the most. She spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had never once considered that I might be essential to the structure she was rearranging. "You'll figure something out," she added. "You always do. I've always been the reliable one. The one who covers gaps quietly. The one who pays on time. The one who doesn't announce sacrifices because doing so would make people uncomfortable. The one whose contribution becomes invisible precisely because it never falters." She had absolutely no idea that I was the one paying the rent. $5,600 every month. Automatically withdrawn. On schedule. No reminders. No drama. I had taken it on early in our marriage when my husband's income fluctuated and then never relinquished it, because stability mattered more to me than recognition. The lease was in his name. The assumption followed naturally. I looked at her while she spoke, noticing details I'd ignored before. The way she tapped her finger against her arm when she felt in control, the faint smell of expensive perfume that never quite masked impatience. A memory drifted in, her once telling me how proud she was of her sons, how they handled responsibility. I remembered smiling, nodding, letting the moment pass without correction. This time I said nothing. I nodded once. Calm. Polite. Non-committal. She took it as agreement. He always did. That night, I lay awake listening to the city breathe through the windows. Sirens in the distance, a train horn echoing faintly, the soft rhythm of my husband's sleep beside me. My thoughts were clear in a way that surprised me. No anger. No panic. Just alignment. By morning, the decision had already settled. I called the movers before breakfast. The man on the phone asked how much notice I had. "Tomorrow," I said. He paused, then said they'd make it work. Money, when used decisively, removes friction. I packed methodically. Not everything, only what was mine. Which turned out to be most of it. Dishes I'd bought. Furniture I'd chosen. Art I'd paid to frame. The apartment slowly revealed itself as a shell I had been maintaining alone. My husband noticed around noon. He asked what I was doing, confusion edging into concern. I told him I was moving out. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just factually. He laughed at first, then stopped when he realized I wasn't joking. He asked why I was doing this now. I reminded him of his mother's request. I reminded him that she wanted the space cleared. I reminded him that I was simply complying. He said we should talk. I said we already had. Just not out loud. The movers arrived early the next morning. Boxes stacked neatly. Furniture wrapped and labeled. The apartment echoed as rooms emptied, the sound sharp and revealing. My mother-in-law arrived unexpectedly, heels clicking with purpose, ready to oversee the transition she thought she'd orchestrated. She froze in the doorway. Her eyes moved from the bare walls to the boxes to the clipboard in the mover's hand. Confusion flickered first. Then calculation. Then something colder. "Wait," she said slowly. "What's happening?" I looked at her and for the first time, let the truth sit unguarded between us. "I'm moving out," I said. The realization hadn't reached her yet. Not fully. It was still forming, still searching for the missing piece. She didn't know what terrified her, but she felt it coming. And I let her. She stepped farther into the apartment, heels clicking against the bare floor, the sound too loud now that the furniture was gone. Her eyes kept returning to the emptiness, as if the rooms might refill themselves if she stared long enough. The confidence she'd walked in with thinned, replaced by irritation carefully disguised as authority. "This is unnecessary," she said. "I only meant temporarily. You didn't have to make a spectacle." A memory drifted in, her once telling me that women who reacted emotionally lost leverage. I wondered what she called this feeling crawling up her spine now. The lead mover cleared his throat and asked where he should take the last of the boxes. I gave him the new address. He nodded and kept working. Routine is powerful. It refuses to bend to social hierarchies. My mother-in-law turned to my husband. "Tell her," she said like I wasn't standing there. "Tell her we need to discuss this." My husband looked between us, his face pale, jaw tight. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked unsteady, like someone who had just realized the floor was glass. "Mom," he said, "we should talk later." Later. The family's favorite pause button. She scoffed. "This apartment is expensive," she said to me, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "You can't just leave. Do you have any idea how much it costs?" I did. I had known every month for years. I've always been the reliable one. Not because I was thanked for it, but because someone had to be. Bills don't care about family politics. Rent doesn't wait for acknowledgement. "The oldest needs this place," she continued, regaining momentum. "He has a wife. They're trying to build something. You understand?" I nodded. I did understand. I'd understood for a long time exactly where I ranked in her mental math. "What will they do now?" she asked, eyes darting to the empty living room. That was the question hiding behind all the others. I took a breath, slow and even. The apartment smelled faintly of dust and cardboard now, stripped of the eucalyptus cleaner she associated with order. I felt oddly calm, like I'd already stepped onto solid ground. "They'll need to figure out the rent," I said. She frowned. "What rent?" The words landed softly, but the effect was immediate. Her expression froze, then cracked as if she were replaying years of assumptions at high speed. I could almost see the numbers assembling in her mind, trying to land somewhere that made sense. "You mean your husband's rent?" she said quickly, correcting herself. "No," I replied. Whine. Silence. Even the mover seemed to slow, the sound of tape ripping suddenly too loud. My husband's head snapped toward me, his mouth opening then closing again. He hadn't known. Or maybe he had, in a way people know things they benefit from not examining. "What do you mean yours?" my mother-in-law asked, voice sharper now. "I've been paying it," I said. "Every month. $5,600. For years." Her face drained of color. The authority she wore so comfortably slipped, replaced by naked calculation. I watched her do the math. Not just the rent, but the security deposit, the credit requirements, the reality of putting her oldest son into a space he couldn't afford. "That's not possible," she said weakly. "You wouldn't." "I did," I said. Quietly. "Because it needed to be done." My husband finally spoke. He asked why I'd never told him. The question carried less anger than fear. I told him the truth. Because no one asked, and because it was easier to be dependable than to demand recognition. My mother-in-law reached for the counter to steady herself. She said this was all a misunderstanding. She said families didn't keep score. She said we needed to talk about this privately. I looked at the empty rooms, the bare floor where our couch used to be, the echo where laughter had once lived. I thought about how invisibility is often mistaken for generosity. "I am talking about it," I said. "Right now." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "If you leave, they can't move in." The terror finally surfaced, raw and unpolished. "I know," I said. She stared at me, seeing me clearly for the first time, not as an accessory to her son's life, not as a convenient support beam, but as an independent structure she hadn't accounted for. Outside, a truck door slammed. The last box was loaded. I picked up my coat and keys. My mother-in-law opened her mouth again, searching for leverage, guilt, tradition, obligation, but found nothing left to pull. As I walked toward the door, she said my name. Not sharply. Not kindly. "Afraid." "Please," she said. I paused, just long enough to meet her eyes. "I did exactly what you asked," I said. I moved out. Then I stepped into the hallway, the sound of my footsteps steady, deliberate, finally audible to everyone who had benefited from not hearing them before. Behind me, the apartment stood empty. And she stood inside it, realizing too late what she had just lost. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. The mirrored walls reflected a version of me that looked calmer than I felt. Shoulders back, face composed, eyes steady. My mother-in-law's voice echoed faintly in my mind, still scrambling for footing, still trying to understand how authority slips away when it's built on assumptions instead of facts. Outside, the city smelled like exhaust and cold air, sharp and grounding. The movers secured the last strap on the truck, metal clanking against metal. Paperwork was signed. Doors were closed. Finality has a sound if you listen for it. My phone buzzed before I even got into the car. My husband. I didn't answer. I drove to the new place in silence, letting the unfamiliar streets recalibrate me. The apartment was smaller, quieter, and entirely mine. Light filtered through bare windows, dust motes drifting lazily, unbothered by anyone's expectations. I sat on the floor for a moment before the movers arrived, coat still on, keys heavy in my hand, letting the reality land. I've always been the reliable one. The one who fixes quietly so no one has to panic. But reliability has a shadow side. It teaches people to assume you'll always absorb the shock. An hour later, the calls started coming in waves. My husband first. Then my mother-in-law. Then his older brother. Messages stacked up, each one more urgent than the last. Confusion turned into accusation, accusation into bargaining. I let the phone buzz itself quiet. When I finally answered my husband's call, it was evening. The movers had left. Boxes were stacked neatly against the walls. The apartment smelled like cardboard and lemon wipes. I sat on the floor back against a box labeled kitchen and listened. He said he didn't understand how things had escalated so fast. He said his mother was upset. He said his brother and sister-in-law were furious. He said this was tearing the family apart. I waited until he finished. I didn't escalate anything, I said. I complied. He said that wasn't fair. He said his mother hadn't meant it literally. He said she was just stressed, just thinking out loud, just trying to help her oldest son. I thought about how often women are told to interpret dismissal as nuance. She told me to move out, I said. So I did. He went quiet. Then he asked the question that told me everything. Are you really not paying the rent anymore? There was. Not are you okay? Not did I fail you? Just the missing support beam finally noticed because the ceiling had started to crack. No, I said. I'm not. He exhaled sharply, frustration bleeding through. He said they couldn't afford it. He said his brother was counting on that apartment. He said we needed to fix this together. Fix. Together. Words that arrive late often ask the wrong person to do the work. I fixed things for years, I replied. This time I stopped. My mother-in-law texted next. Long paragraphs. She said she'd misunderstood. She said I'd embarrassed her. She said family shouldn't keep secrets. She said I'd blindsided everyone. Not once did she apologize for telling me to leave. I didn't respond. That night, alone among boxes, I made a list, not of what I'd lost but of what I'd carried. Rent. Utilities. Emotional labor. Silence. Compliance. I realized how much of my life had been structured around preventing other people's discomfort. A memory drifted in, her once telling me I was so easy to have around. At the time I'd taken it as praise. Now I understood what it meant. The next morning my husband showed up unannounced. He stood in the doorway of my new apartment, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. The space didn't recognize him yet. That mattered. He said he hadn't known how much pressure his mother put on me. He said he hadn't realized I felt invisible. He said he needed time to process everything. I already did, I said gently. He asked if I was coming back. I looked around at the bare walls, the unopened boxes, the quiet that belonged entirely to me. I thought about the apartment we just emptied, the one built on my money and my silence. No, I said. Not right now. He nodded slowly, like someone hearing an answer they'd suspected but hoped to avoid. As he left, I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing in the stillness. For the first time in years, my choices didn't need approval. They didn't need translation. Across the city, my mother-in-law was explaining to her oldest son why the apartment was suddenly unavailable. Why the numbers didn't add up. Why certainty had collapsed overnight. And for the first time, the problem she faced couldn't be solved by moving me out of the way. The fear didn't hit her all at once. It arrived in pieces. First, it was practical. Calls to the landlord, hurried questions about deposits, clipped conversations where voices stayed polite but tense. Then it deepened into something closer to panic when she realized my name wasn't anywhere on the lease. Yet my payments had been the only thing keeping it alive. Authority built on assumption doesn't survive contact with paperwork. My husband told me later that she barely slept. That she kept replaying the moment I said the number out loud as if hearing it again might change its meaning. $5,600. Every month. Quietly. Reliably. Gone. I didn't check in on her. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. My new place began to take shape. I unpacked slowly, deciding what deserved space and what could remain boxed a little longer. Morning light filtered through the windows without interruption. No commentary. No oversight. Just quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone watered plants on a balcony, the sound steady and ordinary. I have always been the reliable one. But reliability doesn't mean availability without limits. It means showing up where you are respected. My husband called again, this time calmer. He said his mother wanted to apologize. He said she hadn't realized how much pressure she'd put on me. He said everyone was shocked by how quickly things had changed. They didn't change quickly, I replied. They just stopped being hidden. He asked if I would meet with her. I told him I would consider it, later when the conversation could happen without leverage attached. When fear wasn't doing the talking. That meeting came weeks later in a neutral cafe with chipped mugs and too much sunlight. She arrived early and sat stiffly, hands folded tight around her purse. The confidence was gone. In its place was calculation mixed with something closer to humility. She told me she was sorry. Not for telling me to move out, that came wrapped in explanations, but for not understanding my role. The phrasing mattered. Revealed everything.